What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Timeout with Doc and Caveman. As always, I am Dr. Fantasy here with the Fantasy Caveman. We are ready for the second half of the NBA season here. The All-Star break is now wrapped up, so now we can start to shift our focus to the second half of the season. There's a lot of fun storylines to follow as we move along and get closer to the playoff chase. So that's going to be primarily what we're discussing today. Some of our favorite storylines and what we're looking forward to following in the second half of the season. So, Caveman, where do you want to start with your favorite Warriors, the imploding Bucks, all fun things to
Right,
talk
yeah.
about?
Well, there's a lot of this involving my teams. I mean, I mean, maybe it's a little biased here, but I do think the number one story in the second half is how are Doc Rivers and the Bucks gonna turn this? How are they gonna handle this? Because if I don't know if there's ever been a coach coming in mid-season that's had as much pressure as Doc Rivers has right now in Milwaukee. I mean, he kind of, and it was one of where I read a report that he said at one point he doesn't know why the Bucks brought him in. Like he didn't understand. Like he's gonna take the job obviously, but it's like and I guess that's valid. But they are. So looking at this, they're 5-7 so far under Doc Rivers. But they have won back. They did win. They have won their first two games coming out of the All-Star break. They just beat Philly and who they beat Charlotte. No, who did the Bucks beat?
The Timberwolves.
Timberwolves, yeah. Okay, they have Charlotte. I think they have Charlotte tomorrow.
Back-to-back days, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, perfect chance to get back on track. It doesn't get much easier than that. But I think this is kind of the story because I'm sure we'll talk about them as this episode goes on. But the Celtics right now look like the favorite, not just to win the East, but to win the championship, if we're being honest. And so if you're looking at, okay, what team in the East can stop Boston? And there's other teams that we'll talk about, but if Milwaukee plays to their potential, I think Milwaukee and Boston is the best matchup.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at, you got Giannis who's still being Giannis and playing at MVP level. Damian Lillard, I mean, I've been saying this. I think that the All-Star game and that's the lone bright spot to come out of the All-Star game is that, Damian Lillard maybe gives him a confidence boost, So I think that's something to watch. This season's rides or dies on Damian Lillard, if we're being honest. We know what Giannis is gonna do. The Bucks have solid supporting role players. I really like what I've seen from Malik Beasley this season. Jay Crowder, well, he's not shooting the ball great. Jay Crowder's doing what he was brought in to do.
Yep.
So, Middleton, kind of expected this out of Middleton to be in and out of the lineup. Hasn't been good, but we kind of, we don't need Middleton now. We need him for the playoffs, which, hopefully he steps up and is ready for the playoffs. But Damian Lillard's the key. And because the problem has been that Damian Lillard so far hasn't been doing what we brought him in to do, and that is to take that pressure off of Giannis, so Giannis isn't looking at four guys when he's in the paint. And Damian Lillard's supposed to be that guy, start hitting some outside shots, maybe start relieving some of the pressure off of Giannis. And so far, he hasn't really been doing that to his standards. So I think that is, I think that's the number one thing to watch heading into the second half.
It's like your expectations are very high from him. The guy just started the All-Star game, 24.5 points, and he's not doing it for you, huh?
He's scoring, but you look at his percentages.
Yeah, they're a little down.
But what would you say? What's your number one
Ugh.
thing you're looking forward to the second half?
Number one, that's tough. So I'll start off with this wouldn't be my number one, but just kind of continuing the conversation with the Eastern Conference here. I feel this is, I don't want to say a make or break year for the Celtics because they have a very
That's
young
always nice.
core and a lot of pieces, but it feels like they should have maybe won the championship last year. They've disappointed a few years in a row. I can't really name a weakness that they have at this point. I mean, they're one of the elite teams defensively. They have star power, they have veterans, they have some youth, they've had good coaching. I mean, they don't have a hole. So if they don't win this and added on top of that, I don't know how many other teams are at that level in the Eastern or Western Conference. And I think historically in the NBA, we've looked at it and, maybe there's 3, 4 teams at the top. We're like, okay, one of these teams is definitely winning the championship. This year, I feel like it's the Celtics and then a bunch of just mishmash teams underneath them. So if they can't take advantage of that and win this year, I mean, it's a boring storyline to talk about because they've dominated and they've been so great. And it's like, they haven't even won a championship recently, but it feels like they have for some reason because they've been
Yeah.
at the top for the last few years. But if it's not this year, I don't. There's a lot of youth in the NBA. There's a lot of up and coming teams. I think their road to winning a championship only gets more challenging over the next 2, 3, 4,
Mm-hmm.
5 years. So if it's not this year, when is it going to be is my biggest question. So I think that's going to be interesting with the Celtics. You kind of mentioned who's going to be that team that competes with them. But I'd even not even in the Eastern Conference for me, but just on a broader spectrum, I
Mm-hmm.
think the number one storyline for me is just seeing which one of these young teams or these up and coming teams is for real, right? Because there's so many teams who we talk about, the Cavaliers and the Knicks and the Pacers, even the Orlando Magic, who we have not given enough love to over the last few months. They're only a game out of the 6th seed right now. And I don't see with the 76ers faltering why the Magic couldn't work their way into that top 6. And if you said that preseason, we would have laughed because we knew they were up and coming and they were going to get better. But I mean, they're playing really good basketball. They're a top 5 team defensively in the East right now.
Mm-hmm.
That young core is really clicking, and it's fun to watch. Banchero Paulo is on his game right now and really emerging into an elite superstar. He's not a superstar yet, but he's going to be in that category if
Very. He.
he's
It
already
might
close.
get there early. I think he's. I think he's really close. Like
Yeah, you could make the argument,
he's.
another season with a little more growth. I bet next year we'll consider him a no-brainer superstar, and he could be
Yeah.
a face of
By some
this
point
league.
next year for sure.
For sure. And then even that's just in the Eastern Conference, all these kind of up and coming teams. Then you go over to the West, and it gets even more interesting. We have two of the youngest teams in the entire league right now, tied for the number one seed with the Timberwolves and the Thunder. As we're recording today, they're tied for the number one seed. You have the Kings, who are kind of up and coming
Mm-hmm.
and playing really good basketball. You have the Pelicans, who are tied for the sixth seed right now, also one of the top 5 youngest teams in the league. You have the Mavericks, who went 7-0, and they just lost their first game the other day, but after the trade deadline, so they're putting these new pieces together. And that's the piece we didn't talk enough about with the Mavericks trades. It wasn't necessarily, people wanted more exciting trades from them, but they look like a whole new team defensively. I mean, they have been a top 5 defensive team since the trade deadline, and
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be huge. If you pair good defense along with Kyrie and Luca, I mean, there's no reason they can't win the Western Conference. Let's just
Oh
be
yeah.
real about it. I mean, they're hitting their stride at the right time, and they're going to keep growing as a unit. So to me, historically, I think the NBA, I don't want to say it's boring when it comes playoff time, but I feel like it's predictable, I'll say. There's,
Mm-hmm.
we kind of figure it's going to be the Celtics on the Eastern Conference. But for the first time in a while, I could see any of the top like 8 teams in the Western Conference making the finals. Honestly, if you told me the Clippers did, the Nuggets, the Thunder, the Timberwolves, the Suns, the Maverick, I mean, that's a ton of teams that could compete at the top. So I'm looking forward to seeing, this is where I think real teams true character shines. Like the Thunder have been so good in the regular season. The Timberwolves have been so good right now. But when it comes playoff times and the lights are shining on Anthony Edwards and Shea and some of these other young stars, how are they going to perform? Are they going to put the team on their back and carry their team to a
Mm-hmm.
championship? Or are they going to, not to say choke because it's really going to be their first opportunity in the playoffs, but I think it's going to be telling to see how these teams perform, especially these young teams perform. And that's what I'm excited about, to just see, there's kind of this mishmash and this group of teams underneath the Celtics. Who's going to emerge and say, hey, Celtics, if you don't win this year, you better watch out because we're going to be your biggest competitor over the next 5 years.
Yeah, and the point about I mean, it feels like we've been talking every off season for a while about this for a while now. But at what point does the tandem of Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum not work?
Yeah,
Like
it's
they've
true.
been together now for like what 7 or 8 seasons
Yeah.
or something like that. I mean, what Jaylen Brown and the thing is it's gonna be tough because didn't Jaylen Brown just signed the Supermax, I believe.
Yeah.
So I mean, but at what point are you like, if you're Boston, you're like, okay, this team is arguably the best team they've had in the Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown era in Boston. This is the best team they've had, most complete, offensively, defensively. They got depth at big man. They got guard. They just have depth like crazy. They're crazy offensively. They're crazy. They're just, you might, if not now, when's Boston gonna win? Because like this is like nobody in it. It pains me to say it, but like it's weird to think of because for the longest, for like the past several years have been okay. Milwaukee and Boston, either one of them, it's a kind of like a tie, like who's gonna come out of the East. Boston has clearly jumped Milwaukee.
Yeah.
And now, not only, but the thing is, now that puts pressure on Milwaukee as well. Now it's like they brought in Damian Lillard expecting to win a championship, and now it's likely that they're not even going to come out of the East. So and you kind of mentioned the West and that the top teams with the Timberwolves and Thunder and Denver. We got to talk about a team that just won the championship. They're going to be there. But that brings me to the MVP race. Something that is worth talking about because with Embiid going down, very unfortunate because it was a runaway for him in my opinion.
Unfortunate for him, maybe fortunate for us.
Fortunate for us because now it's an actual discussion. Because Embiid, like, just want to take a moment before we move on to who's actually eligible for the award. Embiid was having such a insane season
Yeah, he
when he
was.
was healthy, like an all-time great season,
Mhm.
not just an MVP season, like all-time great numbers. But and I think that's where when you were talking about who's gonna finish on top of the West, this is what the MVP race is gonna come down to.
Mm.
If the Thunder finish as the number one seed in the Western Conference, I think it's good. The MVP award's got to go to Shea. If you think about it, but here's the thing: if they don't finish, no, what the real discussion is going to be is if they don't finish number one, but they finish ahead of Denver.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's a real discussion because I mean it's crazy because Jokic is, you know, it doesn't even feel like Jokic is having like a really great, like, he just puts up like quiet great numbers out of nowhere. Like you watch, like you try watching I tried watching a Denver Nuggets game the other day. There the other day, and it's like, God, Jokic's so boring to watch. Like, like this, like what is this? Like he has no business, you know, being this good. But I think that's kind of that's another key storyline I'm definitely looking forward to. Who's taking home this MVP trophy?
Yeah, and I think it's been fun overall. It's similar to the discussion of just, I guess all the teams that are cluttered and mashed up together. I think it's the same for the MVP race. I mentioned it when we talked about it a few weeks ago, but you can say Jokic and Shea are clear front runners, but I mean, let's say that the Mavericks go. I mean, Luka has crazy numbers right now. I mean, he's not really being talked about in this discussion, but let's say the Mavericks go on this crazy run. They're only 7 games back from the number one seed. I mean, crazier things have happened. What if they finish as a number one seed and Luka just went wild? I mean, there's no reason that he can't be in that conversation. So I think it'll be fun to monitor that. I mean, it's probably the only award at this point that's exciting. And you and I were talking before we started recording about the Rookie of the Year race a little bit as well. It's a little unfortunate because Chet is having an amazing season. I mean, you mentioned it before, but I mean, in most seasons he would be the runaway no-brainer rookie of the year without question to ask. But Wemby's been on an absolute tear right now. I mean, it's just been cool to see him evolve and live up to some of the expectations he's had, and I always enjoy that part of this time of year too. I think that for some of the teams that aren't performing well, it tells you a lot about their culture and what their potential is moving forward. So even looking backwards a little bit, so the Magic, we've seen what they're capable of this year so far. I mean, at the end of last year, even though they were one of the worst teams in the league, they were playing hard and they were fighting till the very end. So a
Mm-hmm.
team like the Spurs, the Hornets, the Pistons, these young teams that have not been very good, I like paying attention to see, are they winning games and competing every night? Because if they just pack it in, I think that says a lot about team culture personally. And whether that's they need a new head coach, they need a new core, you can read into that as deeply as you want. But I enjoy that piece because sometimes that helps you. So if the Spurs have been a little more competitive recently, I don't think they're quite packing it in yet. But say they have a decent end of the season here. I mean, that gives them a lot of momentum for next year. They'll have another top
Mm-hmm.
pick. Wemby another year with this core of guys that they have. So I like watching things like that and
Trey
seeing
Young.
how. No, don't get me going on this. I already used all my anger. If I will be so mad if he somehow ends up with the Spurs. But I like seeing how the young players play. Like Brandon Miller for the Hornets has been really freaking good in February.
Mm-hmm.
He's averaging
Mm-hmm.
23 points so far this month. You have guys like Podzemski with the Warriors, who we'll see what
Mm-hmm. I've
happens with them the rest
been
of the year.
very impressed with him this season.
He's cool. I mean, he's a championship winning caliber kind of player. I like him. He's the kind of guy I would want on my squad. You have both the Thompson twins playing really well right now, both getting more minutes with the Rockets and the Pistons. And I guess along those lines too, I think it's interesting not only to think about how much effort and where these young teams are going in the future, but I think it's also an interesting time to start analyzing whether or not some of these young cores work. So, for example, the Pistons, and you can say, throw any excuse in the book, right? They're too young. Cade has been hurt prior to this season, X, Y, and Z. But I mean, look at these other young teams who are at the top of their game right now. We have the Thunder as the second youngest team in the NBA right now. tied for the number 1 seed. We have the Magic as one of the youngest teams in the NBA in the playoff chase. What is the Pistons' excuse at this point? They had a number 1 overall pick. They've had a top 5 pick in Jaden Ivey. They've had Jalen Duren, who is a top 10 pick. They have these young guys. Why isn't that core winning? So I think there's some of these questions you can start asking. Same with the Hornets, and LaMelo's had some injuries and whatnot. But I think it's interesting to start looking like, are these winning young cores, or are these teams going to have to reevaluate how they're building moving forward? Because I think from what we've seen this year, using youth as an excuse is just an excuse. These young teams are playing with the best of them. I mean, Chet missed his entire rookie season, jumped in like he was, never missed a beat and never missed a game from college. So it's an excuse. I mean, on paper, the Pistons are really talented. When you think about Asar Thompson, Jaden Ivey, Cunningham, and Jalen Duren, they should not be as bad as they are. And I think the same thing with the Spurs. The Spurs have a lot of talent with Wemby and Vassell playing really well, and Keldon Johnson, and Sokan being what he is at this point. He's still young. I think he's got some potential, and he's shown a lot of flashes this year. But what are those teams' excuses at this point? So I think that'll be fun to monitor too.
Yeah, and but I think that speaks to the bigger overall point. The NBA is flushed with talented players, and the teams that they're on, like these players, like I truly think, even though the Pistons lost 28 in a row or whatever, the reality is any team can be any team on any given night.
Mm-hmm.
The talent that all these teams have. You mentioned the Pistons, who are won like 5 games all year or something like that. They have really good young players. You look at the Hornets, and LaMelo's missed. Like said, LaMelo's missed a bunch of time, but they got Brandon Miller. So they got pieces. All these teams have pieces. I think coaching is definitely a big part of it, and system. And just effort. You definitely. I've definitely, speaking about the Pistons. I've definitely seen some moments when they were on that massive losing streak where the players just looked defeated on the court, like like almost like they just like given up on life. That's kind of what it looked like. So that's part of it too. You mentioned Webby and the Spurs. Going back to this, so I read this stat. So Wembanyama is already the first player in history to record 150 blocks, 150 assists, and 75 made threes in a season, right? Here's what's crazier. Chet Holmgren, who, say what you will about him not having any chance of winning, is the first player in history with 100 plus threes while blocking 150 shots. And it's not even March, and these players have been the first in NBA history to do these things, and that just speaks to the talent that the young talent that's in the league. I don't recall there being this much young talent in the league, like maybe like ever since I've started watching the NBA. The amount of youth in the team with that shows so much promise. All these guys that are coming in and having stellar seasons. That I think that's just kind of, and I'm kind of getting off track. We're trying to talk about the current NBA season. It kind of got off of talking about the state of the NBA as a whole, but and I know you, just to pivot a little bit, I know you didn't want to talk. I know you probably don't want to talk about them, but Golden State is looking, and we haven't talked about them yet. Golden State is starting to, to cook up something a little bit here. They've won 9 of their past 12. Weirdly, maybe not coinciding with Draymond Green's return from his latest suspension or whatever you want to call it. Klay Thompson coming off the bench now. You saw his first game off the bench had like almost 40 points. Chris Paul's coming back.
Yeah, this week. Yeah.
This week. Jonathan Kuminga is really coming into it. He's now like a certified mainstay in that lineup. Like when the Warriors, when Steph Curry's moved on, Air's gone, and Klay Thompson's gone, and Draymond's gone. Jonathan Kuminga is like a main key piece to their future. Along with the rookie. I'm not even going to try to.
Eventually, you'll learn how to say it.
Eventually, I'm going to watch a YouTube video on how to pronounce his last name. But he's been the guy that stepped into the lineup for Klay Thompson. He's been the guy that's replaced Klay in the lineup, and the Warriors look like Steph Curry's being and doing Steph Curry things. Kind of a similar situation to Giannis. We kind of expect Curry to perform, and he's performed. I think the only reason he's not like in the MVP race is because the Warriors suck, or they've sucked this season. But you could look at the Warriors are like only a couple games out of 6. Like you mentioned how close everything in the West is. They're only like a few games out of 6th place, even.
Yeah,
so games. So it's like. Maybe we've seen like the Warriors like dominant dynasty, like that version of the team is obviously not there anymore. But like you said, the West is wide open. I feel if this is how the Warriors are gonna play going forward and for the rest of the season, I don't think it's crazy to say the Warriors can't make a run this year either. Because they've been on this run and they're gonna be getting Chris Paul back. So I think you have to talk about the Warriors. Them possibly, creeping into this mix somehow. They have they have like a super soft schedule.
Yeah, they do.
Coming up. So, they got a couple games. I mean, they got like some really bottom feeder teams coming up. So, I mean, you gotta consider Golden State. I mean, Golden State like a month ago looked like dead in the water. Like this was over. Like,
oh yeah, I definitely did.
They looked dead in the water. They're like okay, let's just get on to the next area of Warriors basketball. But they're starting to cook up a little something down in Golden State. So
yeah, and they are playing a lot better. They do have a cupcake schedule the rest of the year. I wouldn't be surprised if they finished in the top 6, but there's just so many teams that jump over right now that I don't know if they're going to do. I mean, I think a lot of it's going to depend on the health of teams, if we're being honest about it, too. I mean, one key injury, and some of these teams could just completely tumble out of the picture altogether. So I think that'll be kind of interesting. And fingers crossed that doesn't happen, because this is going to be wildly competitive. So, I mean, as of today, the play-in tournament would be the Pelicans, Mavericks, Lakers, and Warriors. I mean, that would be an absolute insane play-in tournament. You have Luka, LeBron, and Steph Curry in the play-in tournament. That would just be absolutely ridiculous. So It's interesting. We're so excited talking about the youth and the future of the NBA. We haven't really talked about like the Lakers or the Warriors, the Suns,
I just had to bring up, we Suns who
the
they got Kevin
Clippers.
Durant, Devin Booker. Yeah, and I think that's kind of where I wanted to go. I know what else you wanted to talk about, but just the we've been talking about all these younger teams in the West that can possibly make a run or who's gonna finish as number one. You still got the older teams I just mentioned, Golden State. Still got the Clippers, who they. I think that they finally got the whole. In my opinion, they finally got the whole Russell Westbrook, James Harden. They figured out how they fit together.
Yep.
I mean, Kawhi and Paul George have been relatively healthy this season.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they both missed some time, but they've been healthier than expected. Still, that to me, that is what's stopping the Clippers from winning the championship, especially now that they've gotten their rotation figured out. It seems
Mm-hmm.
the health of Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, that's what's stopping the Clippers from winning the championship.
Oh yeah, no, there's no doubt
I
about
think
that.
if Paul George and Kawhi Leonard stay healthy for an entire playoff run, they're winning the championship. I think they beat Boston.
Them and
Like,
the Celtics would be a really, really good finals.
I,
Gosh, what a disappointing season if the Celtics ended up losing to the dang Clippers. But I mean, I think there's going to be some interesting playoff matchups overall in the West too. Just I guess we're kind of talking about this youth and experience, kind of battle here that we're going to see, especially in the Western Conference. But you're going to see some interesting matchups where the Lakers, Warriors, Suns, some of those teams probably play the Timberwolves, Thunder in the first round of the playoffs, and that'll be that's kind of what I was hinting at early in the episode too, when this is the time to start winning for these young teams. If you're looking at the Timberwolves versus we'll say the Lakers, I mean LeBron has won, Steph Curry has won, these guys know how to win this time of year, where Anthony Edwards, Chet, Shea, they haven't won this time of year yet. So can you step up and can you beat LeBron James in the playoffs? Can you beat Steph Curry in the playoffs? That's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, and I think I would love to see both the Lakers and Warriors make it past the play-in. There's a decent chance that both of them could be in the play-in, so that's
Yeah.
don't know. There's just so many. Probably everybody outside of San Antonio and uh Memphis. I know Memphis isn't very good,
Yeah, the
but
Trailblazers.
Trailblazers but there's what even uh you know so there's you mentioned the Pelicans, anybody not you mentioned the topic. I think anybody that starts the top 10, if you include the play-in is in the West. In the East, I don't think this is the case because I think the East is very
That's top heavy.
very
Yeah.
top, just not as good. But the top 10 teams in the West, I think you can make some sort of argument for them to make a deep playoff run.
Oh, 100%.
No matter, just to be clear, think a team that comes out of the play-in tournament could go and win the championship.
100%. Yeah, I agree with that.
So and this is the first time, even since because I think the play-in's been around. Was last year the first year of it, or was it the year before?
This is the third year.
So, as far as I know, this is the first time, since this has began, that we're talking about a play-in team possibly winning a championship. This is, I think it's just this is definitely a stark contrast from the All-Star game. There's so much competition. There, this, and that's the NBA hasn't been like this in a while, where there's so many teams that can win it. There's just there's so it's just a great it's honestly a great time to be an NBA fan. There's just so much, you got the mix of the youth with, guys like LeBron and Steph still near the top. Both LeBron and Steph are like ageless wonders. Like
Yeah.
LeBron still, you you wouldn't be able to tell by him playing that he's damn near 40 years old.
It's crazy, yeah.
Steph's like 30, 30, 35 or 36, like still shooting the lights out. Like he's the greatest shooter ever. Like, and then you got like Anthony Edwards, who I don't know if this is too well, and it's too early. I think once these guys are gone, once LeBron's gone, once Steph's gone, I think this is a very interesting point. I watch First Take once in a while, but they had the debate on who's gonna become the face of the NBA.
Mm-hmm.
And you got guys like Giannis. So I don't think Giannis wants to be the face of the league. Jokic definitely doesn't want to be face of the league. He barely wants to be playing basketball. So you look at these guys. You look at like an Anthony Edwards, like these guys. We're talking about the guys that are gonna be the face of the league. So, and we're talking about these guys possibly winning a championship this season. So it's a great time.
Yeah, it'll be a fun finish. I mean, more so than most years that that I can remember. I can't remember a time when there's been a more competitive landscape and more parity in the NBA. So it's going to be a fun finish. Looking forward to that. Anything else you want to bring up before we wrap it up here?
I think I can't think of anything off the top of and we barely talked about. I mean, we kind of glossed over them, but we didn't even really. We mentioned like the Cavs in passing, but they're like the hottest team in basketball right now.
Yeah, overrated. No, I like the Cavaliers.
So like we got them. Like it's crazy how, and we talked about them a lot. I think this was like the Boston Celtics episode. We talked about them so much, but like it's just like I'm not obviously I'm a Bucks fan, so like I hate the Celtics, but like I'd be disappointed if they don't win the championship this season.
Yeah.
Like there is no reason on earth that the Celtics shouldn't win the title this season. So
Yeah, I mean, there's always something to be said. Like Jason Tatum, I think, is a pretty likable superstar. He doesn't seem too over the top, or I don't know. Yeah, I mean, you'd like to see a guy like that win the championship. He deserves it.
well, yeah, so so does so does Drew Holiday. I think they kind of Drew I did more. I'm not saying more because like business is business, and the Bucks made the what they thought was the best move for the team, which at the time I was fine with. But you got to think Drew Holiday felt a little disrespected. Like the Bucks basically came out, but that they basically said that you're not a good enough supporting piece to Giannis for them to win another championship.
He's just laughing in their face right now, but
Yeah.
cool. All right. Well, I think that's it. We'll have plenty of storylines and more news to talk about over the upcoming week. So we will see you guys then.
Yep.